Hi friends, Angelica Vanetta, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to visit our website at inclusiveiowa.org for information on upcoming events and to sign up for our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Baranowski. I am Manager of Special Projects here at the Cedar Rapids Gazette. I want to welcome you all to session 4 of the Economic Development track of this year's Iowa Ideas Conference. First and foremost, because really it's my primary role with this whole deal, is I want to make sure and thank our sponsors for this session. ITC Midwest, obviously overseeing the whole thing and has been with us since the beginning. This is both economic development and DEI track, so I need to thank Inclusive ICR for their support. And in this case, we have CRBT, also a DEI intersections track sponsor, and the Economic Alliance of Cedar Rapids is also a sponsor of this session in content block form. So thank you to all of those. That might be the longest list that we have for any session. So I'm glad I made it through that. I'll try to remember to thank you all again. But in the meantime, I want to welcome you to coming together for the greater economic good. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I feel like it's one of the most fun that we have just because we're talking about the good things that are going on around Iowa and some of the challenges as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your organization, and then we'll dive in. I'll start with you, Emily.
Good afternoon. I'm Emily Schmidt, Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel of Sugut Manufacturing. And we're based here in Sheffield, Iowa, town of 1,200, and we employ over 600 in this rural town. And we manufacture everything to store the grain, move the grain, and dry the grain. So we have locations across the U.S. as well as 2 abroad. So all of these coming together for the greater good really speaks to us, as it is a mission of us to do more with what we were given for the world. So look forward to discussing this afternoon. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Yeah, hi, everybody. My name is Caitlin Byers. I work for a local nonprofit by the name of NuboCo, and we are putting emphasis on entrepreneurship, education, and innovation. We do that through a lot of different hands-on programming, technical education programs, and community building events. In that entrepreneurship space is where I really work. I oversee a program called Kiva Iowa, which is a community-backed loan program for underfinanced entrepreneurs to get access to capital, more specifically microloans. So our organization, NuboCo, is a partner of Kiva, and I help oversee that program. And, on that idea of just coming together for the greater good, with Kiva, we really are firm on the fact that dreams are universal, but opportunity surely isn't. So we're always focused on creating financial inclusion and offering an opportunity for all people to bring their dream business to life.
Thank you, Caitlin. I will toss it to Dave.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dave Harrell, and I'm the president and CEO of Visit Quad Cities. And Visit Quad Cities is our region's destination organization, chiefly responsible for driving the brand of the Quad Cities, all things, tourism, destination marketing, visitor experience. We've been operating since 1990. And we're a private nonprofit organization. We also have a affiliate division, Sports QC, powered by Visit Quad Cities, which is our sports commission. The Quad Cities is about a region of 474,000 if you take Illinois into account. And so that makes us a pretty unique DMO in terms of managing a bi-state platform. And certainly a lot of momentum and positive things happening in the Quad Cities. So great to be with you. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dave. And finally, Bethany Snyder.
Yes, hi. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Bethany Snyder, and excuse me, I'm the director of the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance. We are the state's nonprofit association. So we represent and are made up of, and represent Iowa's 23,000 nonprofits that are working every day to make Iowa a place where people want to live and grow their businesses. Up until December, of last year, that's when we launched. Iowa was one of only 7 states that did not have a nonprofit association, and so now we're glad we're not counted in those. There's 6 other poor states that don't have one, but now Iowa has an organization that's looking out for our nonprofits' best interests. And I'm so excited to be here and share how our nonprofits contribute to Iowa's economy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much again for being here. And I think a good place to dive in is when we first started talking about this session, we talked a little bit about childcare and some of the good things that have happened around the state in the last very recent past, I would say, that have been difference makers in quality of life and workforce. And I just want to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about that, where we are and where we're headed. I'm going to start with Emily.
Yes, childcare is definitely something that got heightened during the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, Iowa lost a third of its childcare businesses. And then we saw it heightened with women exiting the workforce during the pandemic to take care of their families. So this has just been an issue that keeps piling on more. And when you take that in conjunction with the fact that Iowa has the highest in the nation of all parents in the household working. So we are a state that needs childcare more than others, but yet it is significantly decreasing. So through the pandemic, there was a Governor's Economic Recovery Advisory Board put together, and that was business leaders and government employees that came together and said, what are the top priorities for Iowa as we come through this pandemic to become stronger? And the number one issue that all the leaders said was the priority is childcare. So subsequent to that, the governor did create a childcare task force, which I chaired. And through that, it just highlighted so many issues that are cyclical effects and problems that keep feeding the same system. And so through that, there's a final report, which I'll put into the chat, because if you are interested in helping solve childcare, you need to read the report. If you don't read the report, you really aren't serious about trying to solve it. You're just wanting to talk about it. This is something that I say. I know that may sound harsh, but it's true. You'll learn so many things about the ecosystem of childcare here in Iowa, but also benchmarks from other states. And one thing that is a fundamental issue is just the low wages in childcare workers. And when they have low wages, they are eligible for support to send their children to childcare. So it just creates this cycle that is not solving itself. So we did 51 meetings within 100 days to come up with what are some priorities and changes that we can see. And that so far it's been, I think, 2 years now since we concluded, but it is the number one request that I've seen for me to have comments on, because everybody is affected by childcare. You either are a coworker of someone that's affected, you're a mom that is affected. So all of these issues relate to wherever you are, whether you have kids or not in the workforce, it's still an issue. So some of the creative ideas, we're doing a shared services agreement. So if you think about for economic development, if a parent company buys another one, what are the common services that the parent company absorbs in them own? And so some of it is payroll, accounting, et cetera. So I'll also put in the chat a website that does updates on the shared services model, so you can read for yourself. But that way the child care centers can focus on childcare, and we in the state can help alleviate off issues that are more business that we can do, like background checks, et cetera. And then overall, just bringing businesses as partners, because it is common infrastructure. And it used to only think of roads and all of those type of things for infrastructure, but childcare is needed for the economy to function. And I think we all knew it, but the pandemic also highlighted it. So we need to buckle down and really be serious about how we all can come together to solve it. In your words, just the creativity we've seen. We're going to be building our own childcare center in Sheffield. Going to open up next fall, and we already have 38 on the list for next fall.
That really amplifies or exemplifies the need, because I know Sheffield is not a huge community.
No. And we only had 33 spots, and in our county, we need 150. So it's definitely filling the gap, but we're not even going to get it to where it needs to be at 150.
How about the rest of you? So Bethany, or I'm sorry, Emily was specifically, involved in that task force. What kind of partnerships have you seen within your respective communities along those lines?
Well, I can just say, I just want to highlight that obviously childcare is also an important aspect for people who work in the nonprofit sector. Again, sometimes I think that we forget that they exist and that they go out and have jobs. And so we already know that we have a workforce shortage in our nonprofit sector. A lot of things are contributing to that, whether it's low wages, not ideal work environments, et cetera, but also this childcare issue, again, puts more pressure on our nonprofit workforce as well. And we need our nonprofit workforce to be strong. They're the ones who are housing folks, providing our hungry folks with food, healthcare, all those things that help people go to work and live productive lives. That's what our nonprofit workers are doing as well. And so we're definitely part of the ecosystem, and it impacts our sector as well.
Yeah, and I'd say we're bridging the gap. We're really focused on bridging the gap between historically marginalized entrepreneurs and business capital. But with that, we have parents, we have families, they are working, they need childcare. And these small businesses are crucial in order for all of these economic development efforts and innovative opportunities and local investment. And so, they definitely feel the effects of this on the small business community. But I would say, we find that a lot of people rely on a lot of those resource partners to lean on so that they can go through these business accelerator programs and they can have access to some of these mentorship or coaching services. And in many cases, they are bringing their families, because that is a part of our culture now after a pandemic where you just had to kind of pull together whatever you can to make it work. And so you'll see a lot of people bringing their kids along with. And I'm happy that, these evening courses or accelerator programs like the Multicultural Development Center or 24/7 Black, out of Waterloo in the Cedar Falls area, you find a lot of people that it's more inclusive of just being family oriented. And so I would say in that way, within the business community, it's nice that is encouraged, but it is not a solution. And so the childcare space, being a mother of young children, I feel the effects of this every single day. So I appreciate the work Emily is doing, and would love to relay some of those resources that are available to these business owners so they can help. We can alleviate that stress for them as they grow and expand their businesses in our communities.
The only thing I would add, Tony, maybe just to build on Emily and Caitlin's and Bethany's points, it's when you talk about childcare and you take a step back and you think about how we want to frame talent attraction, talent retention, we're obviously doing a lot more in the marketing space to try to drive awareness to the state of Iowa as a place that we want people to relocate, live, etc. If you don't have something as foundational as good childcare and access to it, you're not going to be competitively positioned against other states, other communities. And so it is central to economic development. And I think, we always need to recognize not only the significance that it's such a huge social impact and challenge, but from an economic development and business perspective, it does adversely impact our ability to attract talent and retain it.
And that is exactly why childcare is such a good jumping off point for this conversation, because it's the perfect example of communities finding innovative ways to get those foundational pieces in place so that they can continue to grow. Another foundational piece is financing, and that is where Caitlin comes in. Caitlin, you identified what your organization does. Can you talk a little bit about some of the partnership or some of the organizations that have spun off from the Kiva program?
Yeah, you bet. So one step further, on Kiva, just for those that aren't as familiar, Kiva International, it's a global organization, global foundation. They created the first microlending website in 2005. And this loan program now, we're part of their US network. They offer up to $15,000 in zero interest business loans for underfinanced entrepreneurs. So everyday people are pooling small lending contributions, so as little as $25 together, to provide financial access to all different types of business owners all across the globe. In this space we're talking about here in Iowa, and actually across the Quad Cities as well, as a part of our partnership. And so these lenders are motivated by social impact and really not expecting to be, paid any interest. They expect to be repaid the loan by the borrower, but it's this cyclical effect of giving back and supporting small business. So as I mentioned, we cover the Iowa market and the Quad Cities. And so we are assisting them through this application process, the fundraising, and also the repayment. And I would say, we really rely on our trustees, is what we call them. These are partners that we have across the state of Iowa, because there is a certain level of trust that needs to be there and present in order for people to dive into any sort of loan program or access any sort of funding. So we really rely on those partners to kind of fulfill that need of relaying the information and making those connections. We have a lot of incredible partnerships. Some of them are, very specific to here in Iowa. We have others that are outside of the state that are actually providing, in one case, an 8-month-long program for our entrepreneurs to advance their leadership capacity and then work one-on-one with business mentorships that are outside of the state of Iowa. So they actually have other perspective and input and people that are in their line of work. But that's been an incredibly successful program. We've been running that for a couple of years, and that was funded through the Kauffman Foundation. I would say we've got, as I mentioned, Multicultural Development Center, a lot of other organizations that are just, we're relying on them to provide us some of these resources. So we're not a credit counseling service, but the Iowa Center for Economic Success is and has those specializations and those individuals who can coach on that. We work with folks over at Dream City in Iowa City and the Latina Collectiva to make some of those links to the Latinx or Hispanic-owned business community. And we do work with a number of different chambers as well, I would say, because there's a lot of success stories coming out of these smaller communities that we aren't familiar with. And we need those individuals to share that with us so that they can continue to access funding and grow their business. So, I would say a lot of those connections that are being made across these different organizations and the links that they have with Kiva, even banking partnerships, that's really the basis of how we're growing and expanding this program across the state. We've worked with 70 different businesses to offer these zero interest loans and helping them grow and expand their business. So we've got some other exciting efforts, that are coming up in this next year, but we've seen all different types of businesses, anywhere from someone who's just starting off to individuals who are growing, maybe a second location, but because of credit issues or whatnot, they aren't able to access traditional financing. So we'd like to get them to a place where they can. And, I think we're diving into this this rural development space as well, realizing that there needs to be a framework in place to bridge these gaps that exist in these other communities, and how can we, identify and leverage different assets that already exist and knowledge that already exists to create these economic opportunities that access to capital it starts with, and then, you know, from there on out with other NewBoCo programs. So really great success stories. If you want to just take a look at the landscape of, you know, who we're serving and what those businesses look like, the faces of the business, you can actually go to our site, nubo.co/Kiva, and you can see all of the businesses that we've worked with just to get a sense of what their story is, what the impact looks like, and you know, maybe you might even know a few of them.
I think those of us in the Cedar Rapids area definitely know a few of them.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to, so I definitely want to come back to the chambers, because I know that's something that Emily has in mind for a solution for some of our other issues moving forward. But I want to flip it over to Bethany. Bethany, you talked briefly about the economic impact of Iowa's nonprofits, and obviously we have people here that are directly connected to nonprofits. But I think that they're far underappreciated. You enlightened me quite a bit to the overall importance of the nonprofit sector.
Oh, yeah. So thank you. So again, I'm Bethany with the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance. We are a brand new organization in Iowa that is dedicated to representing, lifting up, and strengthening Iowa's nonprofit sector. As I mentioned at the top of this webinar, there are 23,000 nonprofits in Iowa. And about 16,000 of them have their IRS 501c3 status. And these nonprofits are, again, as I mentioned, they're the ones who are making sure that our people, again, like Dave was talking about, how do we remain competitive? People want to live in communities that have a strong nonprofit sector. They want to know that there is a thriving arts community, that there are organizations that are there to, again, help feed the hungry, house the homeless, provide behavioral and mental health care, provide child care. Sometimes those can be in a nonprofit setting, to provide health care, et cetera. And so these are things that our nonprofit sector does every single day. In 2020, they filed almost $17 billion in revenue in Iowa. And for every dollar that a nonprofit raises, is reinvested 5 times back into the community. So the ROI on that is 1 in 5. So for every dollar you give a nonprofit, it'll be reinvested or recirculated 5 times in that community. Another thing that I don't think people realize is how big the Iowa nonprofit workforce is. So the Iowa nonprofit workforce is the second largest workforce in the state, under the public sector. So under our government and our public universities, the nonprofit sector is the second largest workforce in our state. 1 in 11 Iowans works in the nonprofit sector. And I think that's a story that hasn't been told. When I was talking to Tony about this, and I do lots of presentations around the state, and I'm in rooms of nonprofit people, I say, raise your hand if you know how many Iowans how many Iowans work in the nonprofit sector. No one raises their hand. No one. Even I wouldn't. And I feel like I know a lot about nonprofits. So that just underscores what a critical part of the economy our nonprofit sector is. And last, I just want to share that so when thinking about our ecosystem and how decisions are made at the Capitol, just because we reduce budgets, the healthcare budget, the housing budget, the budgets that feed the hungry, doesn't mean those problems don't exist anymore. Just because we reduce budgets for housing or SNAP doesn't mean that we all of a sudden don't have any folks who need housing or folks who don't need food. They don't just disappear when we delete that line item in our state budget. What it does is it puts more pressure on our nonprofit sector. They're the ones who have to come in and pick up the pieces that are left behind to make sure that people want to come to the Quad Cities and live, to make sure people want to come and live in Sheffield and work in your community. It's a nonprofit sector that's picking up those pieces. So I just want to remind people, I feel like it's our hidden economy in Iowa that we're not really thinking about that nonprofit sector as a key partner in the work that we do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Like I said, that was an eye opener for me. 1 in 11 Iowans. Who knew?
Yeah.
Dave, we did not have as much time to talk ahead of time. Tell me a little bit about what's going on in the Quad Cities and what you're doing, and what you're proud of, and some of the challenges you're facing.
Well, geez, that could take a couple hours, but I don't think we've got that much time. I'll just kind of hit on a couple things. One, Bethany, I'm very proud to work in the nonprofit sector, so I'm definitely within those numbers. There's a few things. I think what's important to this conversation is we think about economic development, especially in the 21st century economy. We really need to think about brand, positioning. What are we doing to create awareness and grab attention in a very, very fragmented and challenging world as it relates to messaging? And so we've started tackling that more in the Quad Cities to think through how we're going to compete and stay relevant. And what's unique about the Quad Cities and Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, everybody's going through this around the state, is this arms race for talent and visitation, trying to get people to consume our communities in our state. And we are a consumable brand. I think that sometimes people forget that the state of Iowa is a consumable brand and every community within it is. And I think we need to remember that and make sure we're doing the things that are hopefully going to put us in the best position to showcase those stories. So we created a regional brand here in the Quad Cities and launched it a little over a year and a half ago with our partners at the Quad Cities Chamber. And it's really the first time in the history of our two organizations where we've aligned and come together to think about where is the intentionality with messaging to try to do the things that make sense, that people can connect with, because we've got different strategies, we've got different messaging that we're trying to convey. But there are times where if you can have some consistency and unification, that will help break through some of the clutter. And we've seen a major amount of traction, with it. I think the chamber and how they utilize that brand is very different than how we use it. But it's afforded us an opportunity where we can integrate some of our strategies and some of the tactics and things that we're executing against to hopefully move the Quad Cities in a place that's going to be attractive. And not only, we don't believe in live, work, play. Sorry for those that, talk about that. We talk about, visit and live and work and learn and experience and, belong and all of these things that are part of our ecosystem here. And we're proud of it. And so it's a little irreverent. We at Visit Quad Cities, being the DMO and being more in kind of the tourism realm, we can push the envelope a little bit more, or maybe our friends at the chamber, don't have maybe that latitude in certain, arenas. But I think it's given us a chance to think through, like, how do we want to take, our brand and move that, forward within the origin markets that are critical to us. And those are markets like Chicago and, Milwaukee and Kansas City and Omaha and St. Louis and certainly Des Moines and others. And so that's been incredibly fun, but it's important work. And I also want to touch on the fact that IEDA and Travel Iowa, this last year was the largest investment in the history of the state of Iowa for tourism. And tourism leads to talent, and the ROI on that is there. It's also about jobs too. And so I think the fact that the state is recognizing that they've got to invest more in tourism. We were number 44 for a long time around the country. I think Director Durham, her team are recognizing that we've got to put more investment. But I think communities around the state, doesn't matter if they're small communities, more rural places, larger, DMAs. These are things that we all need to do if we want to be effective. The other thing too that I think is unique about us, and then I'll land the plane and sort of give back a little time here, is thinking through inclusivity and just that sense of belongingness and what that looks like from a messaging perspective. We are doing that much more with intentionality than I think we ever have before. And that's not just putting imagery on websites, but it's actually event recruitment. it's media buying. It's a whole variety of how we're attacking, not only the verticals that we're managing, but really thinking about what is our role in terms of being an organization and this economic development engine, and certainly somebody that wants to place brand, but that whole welcoming component, that sense of belonging is really critical. And so where I would give a tangible example would be, we're very proud of an event, and really a series of events, but it's very entrepreneurial in nature, called Mercado and Fifth, and it's all about the Hispanic community, and it's just a wonderful regional asset. And so, we're getting beyond just like messaging that says, hey, come to the Quad Cities. There's a lot of great stuff to do. We got museums and restaurants and things, versus like drilling down to some real intentionality around what are those specific things to further our story, and how can that manifest hopefully in people getting emotional connection to what we're trying to do in the region. So I'm really intrigued by where we're going to travel as the DMO in that space, because quite frankly, it's a challenge area for the Quad Cities, in that only 23% of the people that visit the Quad Cities previous to their visit only felt like we were a diverse community. And so that's something that we've got to work on. And the only way that you can work on that to get that 23% to maybe 53% and even further north is you got to put some intention and some resources behind that if you want to attract diverse perspectives and audiences into your community. So those are a couple things that we're really excited about here.
You said a whole lot there, Dave, and I have like
Sorry.
3 follow-up questions, but they're follow-up questions for the group. So first of all, and before I do that, I want to just encourage our audience to submit questions as well. I've not seen you submit any questions yet, Doug or Kelly. I know that you're out there. Help us out and give us some smart things to talk about. But Dave, you talked about drilling down and telling your own story. That sounds very much like creative placemaking planning that I've been a part of in the past. How do we strike a balance between creative placemaking and telling our story and doing the things that are absolutely necessities for our business communities to thrive, like childcare, like healthcare?
Well, I'll start maybe, and then see where the conversation goes. I think you have to understand they're all interconnected. So, our riverfront in downtown Davenport, we're putting a $25 million investment into that. And it was connected to the Destination Iowa program. The Figure Art Museum too has invested some dollars, and there's some grant funding coming from the state that our community is leveraging to think through like that quality of place, to do something aspirational, to activate our riverfront. But what I love about what we're doing here, and I'm really excited to see where it goes, we're thinking about in our storytelling things where we can maybe dig into a little bit on those historically excluded groups that have a connection to the Mississippi River, and how can we create some immersive storytelling so that we can share the significance of that. And so that's where like we're sort of heading, and why that's important to economic development and talent and childcare and all the things. People they want to live in a community that is vibrant and welcoming, and they feel like there's a variety of opportunities, and they're not always just driven. They can work anywhere. We all know that. So unless you've got that quality of place that's off the charts, you are not going to be competitively positioned. So you've got to do those things. But I think if you're doing those things in the realm of thinking through all of these other components. I was on the phone with the United Way the other day. We're thinking about ways that we can work with the United Way on messaging in and around some of their goals around young people. Well, you'd say, well, why is the tourism guide driven by that? It's like, well, we want more young people here. That helps us. And as a marketing professional, and that's our core competency, we need to help some of our partners and our nonprofits that might not have either the capacity or the resources to be able to do that. That's where we need to travel as just a good shared and common community value to hopefully make us stronger.
I'm not going to take it back after that. Who's
One,
up next?
one thing that I loved about Dave's remarks is the intentionality of the IEDA's tourism efforts. And just on my desk, I have the stickers. They with my background, it's not always working, but they've labeled each area of Iowa with intentional marketing type of driven names. So like, Southwest is the Les Hills and beyond. Dave, you're over with storied and scenic. I'm in lakes and land. And then there's a driftless area and then the capital country. And I think that is very much fun to see. But also the other thing that we need to make sure people remember is they have resources. Like we taxpayers invested a lot of money with IEDA to find out what motivates people to come to Iowa. And so reaching out to IEDA for their resources should be a number one dial for every town, every chamber, et cetera, because we're already investing in money there. So how can we then come together for a greater good, start leveraging it off each other? So that's definitely something that speaks to me of uniting by collaborating and leveraging off each other. So that's an ecosystem that works.
Bethany, I see you nodding heavily there.
Well, I was just thinking, again, we're a brand new organization, so I'm not up to speed on every initiative that's going on in the state of Iowa, but I'm just thinking one of my hopes is, and I think probably Dave and Caitlin, you guys can talk to this better than I can, is I love that IDEA is doing this as well. And I'm just hoping, like, how are they engaging the nonprofit community in that and making sure that those stakeholders are at the table to talk about the great benefits that they're bringing to the region as well. Maybe Caitlin, if you've been involved in those conversations, you can speak to that.
Yeah, a little bit. Actually, the IEDA was the initial funder of Kiva. They are the reason we brought this to the state of Iowa. And I think, a part of it is this, going back to some conversations about just underrepresentation and that creating a lot of isolation. We have this challenge of, but starting a business is that pathway to generational wealth, right? So how do we figure that out? And that was really where the lens that we came to the table with, that Kiva was the solution to. So, I think that's something we're still trying to tackle because, some of these systems don't exist in Iowa, and we need to make sure that there is a wide range of founders in that community and represented. So we want to make sure, just going back to like accessing resources and networks and community support, that we need to make sure we're offering that to all business owners, and that if they're not being exposed to some of these entrepreneurial spaces, or they don't have access to these community resources or educational opportunities, how do we really, I think it's interesting, like about 100% of the people I'm working with are making cold calls. They're not warm intros. And that is unfortunate given that a lot of our communities are interconnected and we have a lot of community interactions at, even like the city level. We can go to our mayor or city manager in many cases and ask, sometimes have a meeting. How do we create those connections across those communities? So that's something right now that we're thinking about and actually working with the, just in conversations with the IDA about, continued financial education opportunities, business coaching and training programs, resource navigation and funding sources. So how do we actually, take people from point A to, all the way up the capital access ladder, specific to finances again? And how do we actually zero in on these physical hubs that provide a lot of these services so we can have, sort of a front door space where people can walk in and feel like they not only are identified, that they feel represented in those spaces, in those places, but that there are opportunities for them to further engage. And there's this, maybe a resource navigator assisting them along the way in their business growth journey. And it's a lot that goes into that and a lot of mapping of all the resources, but we're definitely all trying to figure out what that looks like so that people, as we mentioned, just feel like they are included in the community conversation, and that, this Kiva, we see that sort of as a bridge program to get people involved and interconnected. So, yeah. it's closing those gaps. It's not just like the right thing to do, but it drives innovation and it unlocks a lot of economic gains as well within those spaces. So super important piece of the puzzle.
Thank you, Caitlin. And Emily, you started down this path, but I cut you off a little bit earlier. As it relates to chambers and some of I think everyone here has mentioned chambers so far. Obviously, that's a built-in kind of piece of the community infrastructure that we're all familiar with. But I think you have some thoughts on how it can evolve.
Yeah, I think, when we first try to solve a problem, can we not create another organization? How can we leverage existing ones? And one of that is chambers. And in the discussion on childcare, it was, okay, we also could solve a lot of issues by solving some small business hurdles. And that will take the pool of people that will be affected to a much larger level than just childcare. And one of the thought processes for, professionalizing the child care system, but also increasing worker wages is how about helping them figure out something for healthcare and retirement planning. Those are two things that key employees need to be able to feel in a sustainable job and career. And so if we go to the chambers, at Affordable Care Act does allow associations to come together and offer a health care plan. And that has been proven out. It took some regulations to and administrative rules to figure it out, but it's all there. It's legal. There is a lot of hoops to jump through. It wouldn't be a government regulated thing without those. But we could affect so many small businesses in childcare and all the mom and pops on Main Street if we could figure out how to then get the ball rolling. I've talked to so many business owners and chambers, and they all want to do something, but we're not there yet. Urbandale does have something for retirement planning associated with their chamber. So I'd urge people to go look at that, but we're also getting the thought leaders together from our chambers up North Iowa saying, how can we do this here? Because we need to be innovative to meet these needs. Because yes, we had service bottlenecks during pandemic, whether it was the wait staff, the hospitality industry, but also childcare. And if we can figure out ways to get access to healthcare, you'd see people looking at that as more of a career than just picking it up. And so we're trying to get people together and proactively piecing together how can we do it, so then we can also do a copy and paste and share the stories. As Dave talked about, we need to share our stories. And so if this works, we need to then share it with everybody else. And we could see a mass change cascade in Iowa if we can figure this out, in my opinion.
Who else do we need to invite under the tent to get this done? We have a diverse group here. We have private business, we have nonprofit agency, organization, oversight kind of group, and then we have a couple of specific nonprofits. Who else needs to be invited into the tent, and how do we lure them to start making change?
Well, this audience is definitely first step. Economic development definitely is someone that moves and shakes things. And with chambers, especially, it's usually run by a board that is made up from people in businesses. And so I reached out to one specifically because she's a CFO. So she would know the numbers. She's seen it in her business and in her world of how it could work, because at the chamber level, they might not have that experience with how healthcare plans work to be able to understand how to then implement it. And so we're getting together. I strategically reached out to, like I said, the CFO that's also on a chamber board. Someone from Unity Point in the healthcare system said, I want to help. I want to pitch in. I reached out to our healthcare broker because they are obviously interested in how can we make the market bigger there too. So we have a great partnership with Holmes Murphy that's at the table, and other chamber members that from different cities, so that when we figure it out, or while we're figuring it out, we can go through all the hurdles that also might be seen at other geographic locations for chambers. So if anybody is interested, they can reach out. I'm on Twitter too. You can find me there. But I really do think this could be a transformative change to small businesses in Iowa, and we'd be the innovative approach. Besides, we've seen the marketplace and it hasn't really brought down the prices for someone to go there. So how can we help others do that? And it's something that I'm passionate about. And it's not my day job, but I know that all small businesses, we thrive off of small businesses too, with different vendors, but also childcare. So excited to see where that goes.
So the only thing I would probably, Tony, build on that a little bit, don't underestimate the power of destination marketing organizations, convention and visitor bureaus around the state of Iowa, because tourism is cash in hand economic development. It is quicker. There's immediacy with it. And quite frankly, non-resident revenue drives a significant amount of investment into communities all across the state. And those dollars are being reinvested into quality of life elements that hopefully are making our communities stronger. So engage with those DMOs, those CVBs, because a lot of times they have direct lines of sight to a lot of small businesses. Sometimes I think they get captured. It's just, well, you just kind of deal with the hospitality industry and destination assets, and it's suppliers, it's vendors. It's like the visitor economy is so broad, but I would encourage you, because I think a lot of times they might be marginalized, but they're so critically important to economic development. So I would encourage everybody to always consider their DMOs and their CVBs to be part of any discussion if you're trying to make your community stronger.
One of the things, thank you so much. One of the things I want to draw attention to is, some of the demographics in Iowa is the fastest growing populations are our non-white populations, whether that's our immigrant populations, our new American, our refugee populations. And look at our panel that, obviously that voice is missing from this discussion. So I think that's one. And I know Caitlin can speak to this with the groups that she works with, but our new Americans are some of the most innovative and scrappy and creative community members that we have, who are really some of the economic drivers in these communities, creating new businesses and creating new nonprofits. So I think that's something we definitely need to pay attention to. And then also one of the other demographics happening is we have a youth brain drain happening. I know I was part of that, but most of, our university students will graduate and move out of the state, and maybe they'll come back 22 years later, like I did. But most of them won't. And so how do we try to capture that, the great brains that were already growing in Iowa and keep them here? So I think those are the two things I think that we sometimes forget about, is our non-white communities and our young people, our young workforce.
That's a great point, Bethany. And, I would just mention that 80% of the businesses we are working with through the Kiva Iowa Loan Program are non-white owned businesses. And it's really important to create that shared sense of trust and connection and overall caring for one another across all the different systems in our community. So something I would toss into this list of just crucial partnerships and is to consider traditional financing, banks, financial institutions, because for many individuals, it can be very intimidating, but it is necessary for them to take next steps within sometimes that small business space. So I would definitely include them in this. One of our earliest successes with the Kiva program was establishing a matching fund. About $100,000 for bank partners came together. So Quad Cities Bank and Trust, Community Bank and Trust, Community State Bank, and Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust, covering different geographic regions across the state, providing matches on the platform. It helps our businesses get funded faster, and it also links them to this partner who's really invested in their success. So it's not only kind of building that confidence across small business and the banking community and saying, hey, we believe in you, come through our doors, pay us a visit. It also allows us the chance to create a referral program, and knowing the people within the banks that we can maybe send an immigrant-owned business that English is not a first language. So there is a translator maybe within that banking community, and they feel safe and cared for in that space, and they're not, going on a limb and taking advantage of some risky, financing, credit card, whatever it might be, program. We want to create those community connections across that those financial institutions, because ultimately, in the end, we want all community members, no matter, economic situation or race or immigration status or gender, to, feel these effects of innovation and be a part of this economic development progress. And, we want, again, going back to that, we want to be a community where people can stay and be a part of it. And yeah, having access to all these different types of programs, whether that's childcare or healthcare resources, nonprofits, just in general, having a surge of those in a community, and just being able to feel comfortable in different spaces, and like you are able to access different programs, and that you're represented in those spaces is also very crucial. So we're really thankful for those banking partnerships.
That's great. Thank you. And I also feel like it is a good transition to one of the last things. If you guys can believe it, we're already zeroing in on the end of this session. Thank you for all of your contributions. It's really engaging and interesting. But it goes to a note that came from our original meeting, and I'm not sure who said it, but we were talking about, this is Iowa Ideas, and we've talked a lot about local and hyperlocal. But if we're talking about Iowa competing nationally and America competing internationally, we need to embrace North America a little bit more. Was that you, Emily?
Yeah. And I think, in the past 3 years, we've definitely seen disruption in the supply chain markets, and also how, our steel prices went up 3,000%. Just within a couple months, just because of some tariffs that were put on. So we've seen a lot of disruption, and it highlighted where businesses need to reshore a lot of supplies that maybe they were outsourcing from other countries, especially in the Pacific region. And you'll see in the next couple of years more alignment between Canada, the U.S. and Mexico coming together as North America. USMCA, of course, was the new NAFTA renegotiated agreement during the Trump administration, but it does expire in 2026. And so the next presidential election will be key on who's going to be providing that vision for the North America approach, because right now it's being floated out there, especially at the manufacturing level, that the only way we can really compete with China and to stabilize our supply chain is to work together, all three countries. So that, coupled with immigration reform, which manufacturers do come together on, because it's not a party issue for manufacturers. We all come to the table that we want some immigration reform to support businesses. And so I think you'll see a lot more of that alignment, especially on electronics and other components, to better stabilize our economy and our businesses.
Anybody else want to spin off on that? Nope. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'll just add this. I've got an older brother who lives in Southern California, and he called me up, I don't know, 6 months ago, and he said he was watching whatever, and said during the course of him watching TV, he saw 2 30-second commercial spots all about the state of Iowa. And he lives in Newport Beach, California. And it struck me as, one, I'm glad that we're doing that, and we need to do more of that. But he was intrigued. He'd actually never been here before, believe it or not. And when he came to the Quad Cities and he had a chance to spend time here, and I, obviously in my role and what I do, it completely changed his perception. So that's a marketing challenge. Mm-hmm. Secondly, and how do we leverage that moving forward to make sure that we are, branding and marketing ourselves at a national level, but also global level? Like, what do we look like in Brazil and India and Pacific Rim, et cetera? I think how we feed the world, that is a massive responsibility, but it's also, I think, a huge positioning chance for us to think through advanced manufacturing, technology. We've got an incredibly smart, workforce, but we also have a challenge with, getting young people here, So that whole like emerging leadership from getting people, and not just like college students, but starting at a younger age, and how do we grow that organically? I think it's going to be probably our existential, challenge as a state. But those are just a couple things that I just kind of think about as we think through how we want to position the state of Iowa over the next decade.
And that was really interesting about California, because it might be because we are in active competition with Silicon Valley to be the hub for ag tech.
Yep.
And we firmly believe it should be in Iowa because that's where the crops are. But it goes to we can be the next Silicon Valley for ag tech.
Mm.
I love that.
We have a very influential company that's right here, right down the street from my office. So yes. We like that.
I wonder who. Yeah. I love that you phrased it as like the existential question, Dave, because it's not just brain drain, right? It's an aging population and frankly a shrinking population. How do we do that? You asked the question. Let me ask the group the question as we hit the 5-minute mark before we wrap up. How do we reverse that? How do we attract large scale industry? How do we grow industry in Iowa, which is super strong? I mean, we're sitting here in Cedar Rapids where, grain processing is the driver of our entire economy. How do we continue on with that and tap into that tech market as well when the population is going the opposite direction?
Something we're doing at NewBoCo, and there's other people who can speak to this, but we've had this accelerator program for a number of years, where you're bringing physically, on the hunt, or bringing people to the state of Iowa to build, high tech startup companies that hopefully will be built here and stay here. And while that program looks different, we now have this ISAV, this venture fund that exists in this area to invest in growth stage or expanding companies that, still are in that startup space, so that we can have that infusion of capital here, and that they don't have to go outside of the state of Iowa to find that. And ultimately that just drives, workforce and individuals that are staying here to take jobs that, they might feel like they had to leave the state for in the past. So, and I just wanted to touch on, I went to this mayor's youth conference here in Cedar Rapids the other day, and I just thought there were these really interesting moments where, as a youth that grew up in this area, I don't think there was ever an opportunity that I sat and listened to people of different ages and backgrounds and genders and race and whatnot, that just representation across the spectrum of entrepreneurship, or small business ownership, or just like career paths that were an option. And so we had this opportunity for some individuals to share, about their small business or their, startup business, and why they are here in Iowa and why they chose to stay here, and maybe they left, and kind of the pros and cons of that, and a really fruitful and engaging conversation with these high school students that were sophomores to seniors. And they were like hanging around after, talking about, oh my gosh, you're in the creative space and you're here in Cedar Rapids building this business, and you have connections, remote connections to people for all over the globe, but you can still do that work here. And, I think it's important that, I think that's an ingredient to this as well, is that, there are some unique challenges that you might face running and operating a business here in Iowa, but there's also a lot of wonderful things that come of that. And so let's, connect with those students and tell those stories and give them access points, so that we can have that discussion, and it can illuminate different career paths that they might not know even exist. So I thought that was a really engaging and eye-opening experience just this week, of how many students were just asking questions and engaging with the panelists. And so little things like that, that keeps people, and it keeps them engaged. So not an answer to everything, not an end-all be-all, but definitely a piece of the puzzle.
I know it's not a fair question, but I think I think Dave is right. It's the big question that we have to come together to solve.
We're always intrigued, Tony, by boomerangs here, because that's kind of become a thing in the Quad Cities, where people are just ready to jet and go somewhere else. But boy, we know that we can get them back, and that's all quality of life, quality of place, driven. Also affordability. There's a variety of things, but if they don't have jobs and opportunities, and if they don't have quality education and healthcare, and childcare and all of these things, then it's going to be very, very difficult. The other thing I'm really intrigued by, and this is a longer term thing, is how climate change, knowing that the Southeast for 20 years was such a driver where everybody was like heading that way. Well, just due to the changes in climate and the environment, all these things, like the upper Midwest is positioned really well to maybe think through that as a strategy. I think less and less people are maybe thinking that the Southeast, and I lived in Nashville, Tennessee 18 years and lived in Northeast Florida. I love living in the upper Midwest. I think it's fantastic. And so thinking through how that's an attribute that we might be able to leverage to think about attracting talent.
And for us, we invested in a satellite office in Ames. So having businesses, we want to keep them in rural Iowa, but how do we capture those students that are graduating that might want to move out of Iowa? We've seen our Ames office location grew from 3 full-time staff to 13 within the past 6 months because we invested in a bigger location. And I do think if businesses would look to satellite offices in the university townships, it will help them eventually get them to move up to Clear Lake, to Mason City, around Sheffield, et cetera.
And I know that we're right at the end, but I hate to end this on a negative note, but I do want to talk a little bit, bring up the elephant in the room, which is some of the policies that our state is enacting don't feel very welcoming to a lot of people. So we're talking about creating a welcoming place. I think we also need to think about the macro climate that people are looking at and what they're hearing about Iowa outside of our borders and what that means for if they want to do business or live here.
A great point. It's true.
That is a tough one to end on, but I do have to wrap it up. Josh has been letting us go a little bit long here. You guys were fantastic. Thank you all so much. I want to make sure and mention ITC Midwest, Inclusive ICR, CRBT, Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust, as well as the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance, all sponsors of this session. Thank you so much. You guys were fantastic. And I hope that you will all come back for further sessions the rest of today and tomorrow. I think we're tossing it to Francis Haugen now, who is our afternoon keynote.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.